Cinematic cricket biographies are always an adventure. There is just so much to sift through. You don't know where to start. So today we start at the beginning, do we not? Here is how Bob Simpson played his first game of cricket for New South Wales against Queensland at the Sydney Cricket Ground on December 1960. He was only 16 years old. Here he is struggling against the bowling of a young and wily leg spinner called Richie Benaud. He edged a delivery to slip and was out for two. I think that's fair to say. He was very nearly not out. He was dropped. Here is a look at the great man himself, Sir Robert Clyde Simpson, or just Bob Simpson, one of the greats of Australian cricket, both as a player and a coach. He has sadly passed away at the age of 89, so that wasn't the best of starts by any means. In fact, it was really quite a lean trot for Simpson at the start of his first-class career, such that he didn't play for Australia for nearly 4 years after that. But in January 1964, he got a call up to the Australian squad for the first ever test match at the Melbourne Cricket Ground. They were playing the mighty West Indies, and they included 3 of the 4 men who would become known as the Fab Four, the greatest batsmen to have ever played the game. It was an awesome spectacle, but the West Indies won the match by 403 runs. And so it was somewhat surprising that Simpson was picked for the next test. But the selectors clearly saw something in him, because they picked him to play at number 3 in the batting order. What a place to make your debut. This was the Lord's test. How did he do? Well, this is one of the great cricketing stories, because here is a look at Simpson walking out to bat in his first ever test innings. He made just one run before he was out to a catch behind the wicket. And yet he held the dressing room together. That sounds like a line from a movie, doesn't it? And he kept the team going until the end of the day, when Australia declared their innings at 222 for 9. They followed on, and many thought that they would lose the match easily. But Simpson had other ideas, turned into Ian Craig and Bill Lawry, and made 189 runs, hitting 26 boundaries along the way. The two put on 264 for the second wicket, which was a record for Australia at the time, and they beat the West Indies by 5 wickets. What a debut. It's hard to know where to start with Simpson, because over the course of his career, he did so many remarkable things. But perhaps the pick of the bunch was his epic triple century at Old Trafford in 1964. That was a huge ground, but Simpson took it to task. This is England versus Australia from July 1964, and Simpson comes in at number 3. His team are 123. For 2, he puts on 206 runs for the third wicket with the great Bill Lawry, and that takes Australia to 329 for 2. Lawry goes, but Simpson is still there, reaches his 100 in the 200th over, and then he carries on to reach 200. Australia eventually declared it 535 for 7, and England couldn't get anywhere near that score in either innings, losing the match by an innings and 14 runs. So what was so remarkable about that innings? Is it the 311 runs? No, although that's pretty remarkable, isn't it? Was it the fact that he made 32 boundaries? Not quite. Well, what if I told you that his 311 was a world record? At the time, it was the highest individual score ever made in Test cricket. It eclipsed the previous record of 309, which had been held by the legendary Herbert Sutcliffe for more than 25 years. And as far as Simpson was concerned, he said afterwards, "I never expected to reach 300. It's a bowler's paradise. I was lucky to play one of my best innings." Lucky. What an understatement. The most remarkable thing about the knock, though, was that he put on 404 runs for the second wicket with Bill Lawry, and that broke the world record for the highest opening stand in Test cricket. A record that had stood since 1899, 65 years previously. And that pair went on to break the record again in the next test at Headingley. Yes, in the very next match, they put on 415 runs, which stood as the world record until Brian Lara and Chris Gale put on 418 in 2004. In that match, though, England won. Ouch. They came back to win the series 2-1. And so, Simpson was actually the leading run scorer with 470 runs at an average of 94, and even though he was only playing his second ever Test series, he was named the man of the series. Talk about an introduction to Test cricket. He would go on to play 108 Test matches, scoring 7,554 runs at an average of 48.20. He hit 15 centuries and 33 half-centuries. And he also took 185 catches in the slips. He captained Australia for 6 years from 1971 to 1974. He was a charismatic leader, but results weren't great. They won 6 of 18 tests under his captaincy. That was entirely his fault, because he often had the misfortune to lose toss, and then find himself chasing what proved to be impossible totals. For example, in 1972, they lost to England by 8 wickets despite the fact that Simpson made 200 and not out. And in 1974, they lost to the West Indies by 9 wickets despite making 168. He retired in 1977, having decided that he wanted to move on from the game. He was only 34, but he felt that he had taken the game as far as he could. But he would return 2 years later, when Australia found themselves engulfed in the World Series cricket debacle. Kerry Packer's rebel outfit had just demolished the West Indies in a limited over series in Australia. And now the Australians were gearing up for the return series in the Caribbean. But just before they left, the Australian captain, Doug Walters, broke his thumb in a fight with his wife. So who steps in but Bob Simpson? He leads the team out against the West Indies in a one-off test match, which Australia won. And then a 5-match limited overs series, which Australia also won. However, the political situation was still fraught with tension, and so the players were sent home after the tour, and a new national selection body was set up. When the dust had settled, Simpson stepped down from the captaincy, but he was still very much involved in the game. He was appointed coach in 1986, and he was in charge for the next 10 years. Now those were tumultuous times for Australian cricket, because not only were they trying to regain the Ashes, which they had lost in 1986, but they were also trying to dethrone the West Indies as the kings of world cricket. His first big tournament was the 1987 World Cup in Australia, and it was a huge success. Australia reached the final and defeated England by 8 wickets at the Melbourne Cricket Ground. His fast bowlers, Bruce Reid and Terry Alderman, were outstanding and took 21 wickets between them. His spinners, Greg Matthews and Mike Whitney, took 15 wickets between them. But it was the all-round excellence of his team that impressed the most. And they would go on to defend their title successfully in 1992-93 under the captaincy of Alan Border. Then came the Ashes. In 1989, Australia reclaimed the Ashes after a drought of 12 years. They were 2-1 up with 1 match to go when the unthinkable happened. Graham Gooch hit a double century in the 4th innings at the Oval, and England won by 10 wickets. That was agonizingly close. But in 1990-91, Australia came back to retain the Ashes. They won 2-0. In 1993, they won the Ashes again. It was 2-1. Again, England won the last match. And then, in 1994-95, they won the Ashes once more. This time they won 3-1, and so over the course of 6 years, Australia had won 5 Ashes series. But the ultimate triumph came in 1995. Australia toured the West Indies, and they won 2-0, becoming the first team to beat the Windies at home since England in 1980-81. And that, my friends, brought to an end 15 years of West Indian dominance. As for Simpson, well, he was regarded almost as a god amongst the Australian cricket public. One of the great quotes about him was that he coached in a suit and tie, but knew the baggy green inside out. He was renowned for his man management skills. He gave youngsters a chance. He helped them improve. And he was a stickler for fitness, something that was revolutionary at the time. He died peacefully at his home in November 2023, aged 89, and he leaves behind a legacy that will live on forever. Here is a look at some of the tributes that poured in. Justin Langer called him the greatest of all time. And Ricky Ponting said, "If I had to pick one person who I would want with me when the chips are down, it would be Simmo." But can there ever be another Simmo? I leave that question with you. Thank you very much for watching. Please do like and subscribe, and I will see you in the next video.